one country that no one really talks about in this whole affair, because they've kind of seemed to have made themselves irrelevant because of their own economic um, difficulties, is Pakistan. And I know you know quite a fair bit about Pakistan. How do you see the role of Pakistan in what's going on in the Middle East?
Well, I weep when I look at Pakistan. I must tell you, I'm supposed to be an independent journalist, but I have sympathies for Pakistan, where I've spent a lot of time. Used to write for the Pakistani media, interviewed many of its leaders. Pakistan's a big mess, and it really is the most important Muslim country, in my view, because of its population, its nuclear capability, its powerful military. Uh, but again, this is the thing where the army is there to keep the ruling elite in power as well as defend the country's borders. And it's very sad to see Pakistan not doing more to assert its Islamic identity and its role in the area.
Eric, welcome to Kianistan. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thank you, Eric. Eric, earlier today I had an interview opportunity with Elijah Magnius, and I'm going to start with a similar question that I asked him. You have extensive knowledge of Middle East history and geopolitics. As I understand it, you were there when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982.
I was with the Israeli army,
That's
even
right.
covering the
I'd like to
story.
know more about that. But also, I wanted to know, in your opinion, from what you know about the Middle East, do you think this is another just period of turmoil that's going to fizzle out and we're going to go back to status quo? Or do you think we're now at a turning point where it's unlikely to go back ever to how things were prior to October 2023?
Well, that's a good question. My sense is that I don't know about turning points, inflection points, and things like that, but it seems to me that Israel has determined to ethnically cleanse Gaza once and for all, which has been a big open air prison and a problem for them, and drive out all the people, resettle it with Jewish settlers, and be done with it. It looks like it's happening with the blessings of the United States and Britain.
How how likely are they to succeed in that? How can they get settlers in this kind of environment where even the Israeli army is not secure, let alone the Gaza civilians? In that environment, how can we? Um,
They
im-
have very militant settlers. I've met many of them. They're fanatics, and they're heavily armed,
Hmm.
and they will complete the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip. Where the people go, the refugees from Gaza, this is a second imprisonment for them. Where they go, I don't know. The Jordanian desert in the southern Lebanon up to the Litani River looks like a candidate for getting rid of these unwanted people.
Yeah, that's a horrible scenario to even imagine, because that would probably translate like an end to like the Palestinian um, resistance, because um, that's once they're out, they're unlikely ever to re-enter that land.
That's correct. I agree with you. Unfortunately, it's tragic. But look, the people who are being bombed now in Gaza are refugees from Galilee, north of Gaza, and they were driven out, ethnically cleansed by the Israelis in the 1940s, when we were told that Israel was a land without people for a people without land. And that was the great slogan. Well, that wasn't true. Uh, and there were all these people who were driven out of their homes in Galilee, a very fertile and rich area, who are now being driven out a second time.
It's true. Eric, how do you see, we're just a few days away now from the US elections. Um, do you think there are certain things Israel would want to establish or complete before the elections? Like, I'm thinking about the counterattack that they wanted to do on Iran. Do you think that's now been moved to after the elections, or do you think they're going to want to squeeze that in before the elections? And how do you see things changing after the elections?
Traditionally, we've seen the Israelis make their boldest moves during the U.S. elections. They know that the U.S. government is paralyzed and that they have carte blanche to do whatever they want, which is the case now. Look at the pathetic diplomatic efforts of the United States, Secretary of State Blinken shuttling around doing nothing. Uh, the the American government is paralyzed, and the big financial donors in the U.S., New York, Washington, etc., have made sure that the U.S. government hands are tied.
Yeah, and do you see? Um, we recently had the news of like some leaks from the U.S. about the attacks that Israel was planning on Iran. There are some people who are saying that the leak has delayed Israel's plans, whereas others are saying it doesn't make much of a difference because there's not that much information contained within the leaks. How do you see it all?
Well, the Israelis can do whatever they want. The American media supports them. The American financial community supports them. They really don't have to worry. And the hubris of power has gone to Netanyahu's head. He's taking advantage of it. The question is, how much does Israel want to expand? I think it was Moshe Dayan in one of my recent books said that Israel's objective is not to create any borders, not to create fixed or final borders, but to keep expanding.
Yeah,
And Israel, we know, has had its eye on neighboring territories for a long time.
including Saudi Arabia. Apparently, they have their eyes on that land as well.
Well, they might. I'm sure the Saudis are worried, deeply worried by this. And Qaddafi, poor old Muammar Qaddafi, once told me that he said the Saudis are like very rich people living behind high walls, petrified of their neighbors. And that's exactly what the Saudi Arabia has no army to defend itself because it fears a coup from the army. So the Saudis are just twiddling in their thumbs and buying off politicians in the West. But really, they were once noble desert warriors. They're certainly not showing themselves to be this today. The response of the Saudis and much of the Arab has been craven and really embarrassing.
Very true. Um, Eric, you reminded me you've met Gaddafi. How many times did you get to meet him in person?
One time,
What did you think of him? I think the world seems like a less colorful place without Gaddafi. What did you make of it?
definitely always brought a smile to my face. We had a hell of a good time. I spent a whole night with him in his tent in the outside of the Bab al Azizia barracks in Tripoli. And he was a simple person. He was a Bedouin
Yeah,
who came from nowhere and just happened to be on the right side of the revolt against King Ibn Idris. But Gaddafi did some very good things. You don't hear it all about that now. He was assassinated by the French and the Americans.
it's very true. Because even in his last days, from what I read, Gaddafi was before Gaddafi, Libya was not like a united country, and after Gaddafi, it was unlikely to have that unified um, central command that Gaddafi offered, a united country. Also, I feel that like Europe has been busy putting the world on fire, and then as a result, now that there's floods of immigrants coming into Europe, now they're wondering, what have we done?
Well, yeah, they want to shove them off somewhere. They picked Albania, of all bizarre places, to try and ship. The British did that, they started with Rwanda, and then they turned to little Albania, and it's where do you throw your trash? That's really what the story is, and they're scared of being accused of being anti-black, so they have to find some kind of place to put these people. They be better off giving all these immigrants some money and telling them to go home.
It's very true. In the UK, the previous government tried its best to start sending immigrants off to Rwanda. It didn't really work out, but the problem is still there for them.
What a silly idea was. That's worthy of nitwits. And
Seriously,
how the British, who are intelligent, sophisticated people, could come up with such a stupid idea is astounding.
it's embarrassing. Um, Eric, what do you make of the situation of the neighboring countries in the region with Israel and Iran? I'm thinking just a few years ago, we had reports that coming out of WikiLeaks that Saudi Arabia was happy for Israel to go over Saudi territory to attack Iran. And now we're in a situation where it seems like China has brought Iran and Saudi Arabia closer together. How do you see how sustainable is that closeness that recently was achieved between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
Um, they are natural rivals historically, and the Saudis are petrified of the Iranians. You know, it's not just so-called terrorism; it's the fact that the Iran is a much more semi-democratic government than the Arab states. And the Arabs are worried that Iran will become the vanguard of revolution, which the Middle East badly needs. Look at this thing. Well, the Gazans are being massacred. The Arab world has done almost nothing, make little peeps of protest, and was shamefully inactive. The Israelis have very cleverly emasculated the Arab response to the Gaza crisis by doing diplomatic things and money and bribing American politicians left, right, and center. It's a horrible story. We're going to find out one of these days how much money Biden took from these people.
Very true. Um, when Hosni Mubarak was overthrown, I thought maybe there is like a hope of some change for the region, but that quickly got put down by the Saudi Arabian UAE kind of alliance.
Yes, I agree with you. I thought the same thing. I thought there was maybe some hope, particularly for Egypt, which I know pretty well, where I used to live as a boy. And in fact, the Islamic revolution, whatever you want to call it, in Egypt, was quickly ended by a combination of Saudi money and American influence, where they put in their new general, General Al Sisi, who has established one of the most dictatorial
Yeah.
and vicious regimes in the Middle East.
Eric, why do Saudis find the Palestinians such an irritant, and why what is the relationship there? Do they do they find them an irritant because of their links to the Muslim Brotherhood, or what is the because in some ways I think Saudi Arabia had a chance to establish their leadership by getting hold of the situation and maybe fighting the corner for Palestine, because that's what the whole Middle East streets are calling for. And that was an excellent opportunity for Saudi Arabia, because they're looking to be the leader of the Sunni countries, at least in the Middle East. And that was a great opportunity. But it seems like they just find the whole situation um, an annoyance rather than anything else.
They're not sophisticated people, the Saudis. They once used to be, quote, noble, unquote, desert warriors. I'm thinking of their late King Ibn Saud, who, I'm sorry, Faisal, who was the last really good ruler they've
Yeah.
had. Now they've become timid and scared of their own shadows, and of course, like everybody, influenced by too much money.
It's true. Um, a lot of people are making a lot of money from what's going on in the Middle East at the moment.
Starting with the Israelis.
Very true. There's some recent news about naval exercises with Iran and Saudi Arabia, and air defense exercises between Iran, Turkey, Egypt, and even Pakistan. How do you see those?
Well, it's kind of odd because neither the Saudis nor the who were saying the for the naval exercises, the Saudis or the who else was going to be in the naval operation?
I'm not sure. Must I know the air defense exercise was going to be Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan and Iran.
Well, Turkey is a legitimate Muslim power, and the only one that has not really embarrassed itself by backstabbing the Palestinians. Uh, that's why the Americans tried to overthrow Prime Minister Erdogan of Turkey because he was being too friendly with the Palestinians and he was asserting the might of the Arab people or Turkic people. Um, but now we look at this situation, and it's really pathetic. The As a Muslim Afghan friend of mine has pointed out, the Arab armies are there for only one purpose. That's not to liberate Palestine. They're to oppress their own people and keep their governments in power. And that's why we see the Egyptians being built up and the Saudis being armed with F-15s, F-16s. It's the American ruling technique, keep the armies in power and assassinate or get rid of the revolutionaries.
I think you're absolutely right. I think all the Middle East states are terrified of their own people, which is a
There
shame.
are, there should be. You know, the Palestinians, you never read in the media that Hamas was was a democratically elected party.
Yeah.
It won the elections. And this petrified the rest of the Arab despotic rulers. They don't want this to happen. The Palestinians were, the vanguard of Arab society and culture. They were the best educated, most civilized people. And upon them fell this curse of the Israeli expansion. And it's tragic, but the Arabs are scared of the Palestinians because they're too smart. And we have to think another thing is that the biggest expulsion, the second biggest expulsion of Arab people happened in Kuwait in 2003 when Yasser Arafat mistakenly called for the alliance with Iraq
Saddam Hussein, yes.
because Saddam promised to liberate Palestine.
Yeah, that was a miscalculation by Yasser Arafat, I think.
And the Kuwaitis expelled, if my memory is correct, which rarely works these days, but some 400,000 Palestinians who lived in Kuwait. They were kicked out. That was the biggest expulsion since the Israelis did it in the 1940s.
I remember that. Um, how do you see the role of Erdogan? Because on one hand, he is it all talk and is his bark is louder than his bite because he comes and does these massive rallies, addresses rallies, talks big, curses Israel, but nothing's changed, and he's still being blamed for continuously supplying oil to Israel and keeping keeping the machine going.
Well, the Turks are smart and they have long experience, and they know that if they go too far in supporting Palestine, or are seen as a really strong enemy of Israel, that their economy will be crushed. Or rebellions will break out, as happened once time. So they're playing a delicate game. Turkey is not strong enough to stand up to the Western world. But the U.S. media loves to attack Turkey and Erdogan. Uh, but for being pro-Palestinian.
I think you're right. Also, there was a religious figure, Fatahullah Gulen, who at one stage was a close friend of Erdogan, and then they had a falling out and became bitter enemies. And then Gulen took refuge in USA, and USA used him to put pressure on Erdogan constantly. I just found out that Gulen has passed away. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. He died. He lived in Pennsylvania, in rural Pennsylvania, of
That's
all
right.
weird places. And yes, the U.S. used him as a tool to pressurize the Ankara government. Um, I don't know enough about his organization and what it was involved in, but it was very influential.
It was. Um, Turkey gets a lot of blame for the fact, as I mentioned, that they are channeling oil to Israel, oil that's coming from Azerbaijan. But no one really talks about Azerbaijan. What is the relationship between Azerbaijan and Israel, and why is Azerbaijan in these conditions still insisting on providing supplying oil to Israel, knowing where it's being used?
Interesting question. For about a decade, Azerbaijan has been secretly colluding with Israel to get diplomatic help. If you're nice to Israel, the U.S. will be nice to you. That's how things work in Washington. And Azerbaijan has its own regional issues with the Armenians,
Yeah,
and it's an important country. The Azerbaijanis are playing this very clever game that they're balancing off everybody and using oil to fulfill their diplomatic needs, which they have. They are supplying oil to Israel, and Israel is supplying arms and advisors to Azerbaijan.
yeah, that's true. But on the other hand, I know Azerbaijan has very strong relations with Turkey, very good relations with Russia, with China, with Pakistan. So I'm not sure why they find themselves so reliant on Israel.
Well, probably, as I said, if you get Israel on your side, the Americans will follow.
You're right. Eric, one country that no one really talks about in this whole affair because they've kind of seemed to have made themselves irrelevant because of their own economic um, difficulties is Pakistan. And I know you know quite a fair bit about Pakistan. How do you see the role of Pakistan in what's going on in the Middle East?
Well, I weep when I look at Pakistan. I must tell you, I'm supposed to be an independent journalist, but I have sympathies for Pakistan, where I've spent a lot of time. Used to write for the Pakistani media, interviewed many of its leaders. Pakistan's a big mess, and it really is the most important Muslim country, in my view. because of its population, its nuclear capability, its powerful military. Uh, but again, this is the thing where the army is there to keep the ruling elite in power as well as defend the country's borders. And it's very sad to see Pakistan not doing more to assert its Islamic identity and its role in the area.
It's very true. Because Pakistan has all the potential there, the economy, sorry, the people power, the military strength, location, but they let themselves down when it comes to economy, corruption within government, not just one government, successive governments just can't seem to get a grip on the economy.
That's right. Corruption is so profound, so deep in Pakistan. Even like electrical metering is been a totally corrupted process. The current government in Pakistan has not done anything to make Pakistan proud. Um, and it's sort of a joint thing, a joint operation between bureaucrats and the military, but they're not doing a good job. And there's nothing. Uh, I remember the days of General Ziaul Haq in Pakistan, where Pakistan was a force to be reckoned with. People listened when Islamabad spoke. Now nobody listens to Pakistan. Nobody cares. It's swamped with economic problems, and the right things are not being done there.
So true and very unfortunate. Let me just take a moment's break to introduce our sponsors for today. This episode is proudly being sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a e-commerce marketing agency specializing in making brands successful on Amazon. So if you are thinking of starting a new venture, or if you already have a brand and you want to take it to that next level, then get in touch and WLC will be able to help. For transparency purposes, let me also tell you that WLC is actually a company that I founded and am the director of. When you get in touch with WLC, you'll be getting in touch with me and my team, and we look forward to greeting you and seeing how we can help. Thank you, and now let's get back to the episode. How do you see the economic corridor that was trying to US was trying to establish between India, UAE, Israel, Saudi Arabia, going to Greece? Do you think that's dead in the water, or do you think there's still a possibility that once all of this dies out, they can go back to reviving that project?
I think it's nothing much will come of it. Like so many U.S. plans in the Middle East, they're developed. Everybody in Washington agrees with them, but nobody in the Middle East agrees with them, and that's the problem. We need solutions that come from the people who live there, not from some ideologues in Washington.
True. Um, Talking of Washington, so we've got elections coming up soon. Um, my take on it is that if the Democrats win, we can kind of predict how we'll just get more of the same. Whereas if Trump, the Republicans win, it's kind of up in the air how things will go. I was just saying to Elijah before this that on one hand, it's true that Trump has been um, causing problems in Iran, um, assassinated General Soleimani, but at the same time, he's since Jimmy Carter until today, he's the only U.S. president who has not started a war in his tenure, and also he was the U.S. president who was trying to wind down the war in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So. How do you balance out those two different tendencies of Trump, and which one is going to prevail, do you think?
Very hard to predict Trump. He's purposely unpredictable, and he sort of listens to the last person who talked to him or the last thing he saw on Fox TV, and that's until the next day he changes his mind. So it's very hard to predict. However, comma, I was interviewed by the Trump cabinet in the first Trump administration. I couldn't work there because he had too many extreme people working for him
Yeah,
uh, uh, that I totally disagreed with. I couldn't be associated with it. But now, at least I've got to say for Trump, he uh, he ended the Afghan war with a telephone
exactly.
call. Yeah, he cut off the money to all these criminals and collaborators that were working with the U.S. in Afghanistan, the drug dealers, all the unsavourable people were working with the Americans. And Trump did a great thing by ending it. And there are a lot of people who are afraid now that he may do something similar in the Middle East. However, I don't think he's going to do anything regarding the Arab-Israeli conflict because he received $100 million contribution from the wife of the Las Vegas casino millionaire Adelson, Sheldon Adelson, and Trump's used this money to buy influence with the Republican Party.
It's true.
So sad. I mean, Washington has become a big casino where influence is raffled off.
Absolutely. I think Trump is too deep when it comes to the Zionist lobby. So I don't think he's going to have that capacity to do in Israel what he did in Afghanistan or Iraq. The good thing that I saw about Trump, which is how he was very hard on NATO and Europe and almost ready to more or less end NATO's. What I think is that with Trump coming in, it's going to make a lot of Europeans very nervous.
Well, the worst thing that can happen, they're not going to be rolled over by the Russian Red Army. All that may their military spending may be forced to go up a little bit, and the European public doesn't want to spend money on missiles and tanks. Uh, they don't want it, so that's why Europe really cut its military spending. So it may be forced up a bit, but. So what? They can live with that. And Trump will claim a tremendous victory against the boogeyman of the Russians don't even have the power to defeat the amateur Ukrainian army and never mind rolling over Western Europe.
I was reading that USA has given about $167 billion to Ukraine since the war started 2 years ago, and that's more than the annual defense budget of Russia, which stands around 110 billion. So they're kind of throwing the kitchen sink um, into at Ukraine against Russia, um, and that's just the money coming from USA. Doesn't account for Europe. So in some ways, Russia is not fighting Ukraine, but is fighting the entire Western alliance.
That's correct. Putin has pointed this out a number of times. The there's a hardcore of neoconservative, right wing, pro Israel, uh, Zionist supporters inside the Biden administration. We're making policy, not old doddering Biden, but they are determined to defeat Russia and pouring everything into the effort because they see it as a wonderful chance to break up Russia into little pieces, to balkanize it, in other words, uh, and to remove an enemy to the U.S. just when the U.S. is getting ready for confrontation with China. So the U.S. doesn't want to have a hostile Russia on the sidelines. And whether this happens or not, I don't know. But unbelievable amounts of money, as you say, have been poured into Ukraine. And Ukraine was one of the most corrupt countries in
Yes.
Europe.
Yep.
and God knows where all this money has gone. It's mostly in Swiss bank accounts, I suspect.
In all of this, this is what baffles me most. Like, if we put aside morality and all of those good words, and if we just look at things from a point of view of realism and real politics, I still don't understand why the USA has put so much into the war in Ukraine and now in the Middle East when the peer competitor is China, who is getting stronger and stronger with what's going on because they can just sit to one side, just observe what's happening, continue life as normal, while America gets weaker and more isolated, just fighting these wars that are unnecessary when they kind of should have their eye on the prize, which is China.
Well, I agree with you, but there's another factor here, and that the Israelis are deeply involved in the Ukraine war with Russia. Even though there are a million Russians who moved to Israel, so it has a very
Yeah,
important Russian community there. It's still the Israelis. There are influential Israeli expansionists who speak of Ukraine as the second Israel, and that if something bad happens to Israel, or if it gets nuked, that they'll be able to move all their people to Ukraine. It's not totally crazy. There are a very large Jewish population in Ukraine, certainly in the current Ukrainian government, and Ukrainians are they're making so much money off this. Nobody wants to change things, but they are in bed with Israel, though the Israelis are playing very low key because they don't want to embarrass Putin.
very true. That's really interesting. I didn't really think of that before. Um, Eric, also, so when I look at like the entire chessboard of what's going on, when we look at the role that Saudi Arabia is playing, UAE, Iran, Lebanon, America, it's all kind of predictable. But one thing that really surprises and saddens me is the role of Germany, how they've gone from one genocidal history and trying to wipe kind kind of trying to wipe that history off and have a new start, and now they've ended up supporting another genocide, um, to their own expense. Really, I don't understand the thinking behind the policymakers in Germany.
Well, you're right. The answer to your question is one word: Auschwitz. Every time the Germans need more money, the programs on Auschwitz on U.S. TV will come up, and there's a constant flood of anti-German propaganda in the U.S. and British media. There's no mention at all anymore about the Russian Gulag, where 30 million people died or something like that. There's no talk about that. You never hear the names of the Russian death camps where so many people were killed by Stalin's henchmen. That's all been covered up and largely by British, who were excellent propagandists. And the British have been very clever since the 1940s in diverting attention away from Stalin's crimes. Stalin was their ally. Stalin's crimes to the Germans. And now, every time the Israelis need money, somebody picks up a phone and calls one of the TV networks and says, please run the program on Auschwitz. And it happens, and the Germans are pathetically weak now and crawling, practically dish out money. They're rich and vulnerable. And we wish we'd like to see somebody from Germany stand up and defend Germany and act like a man instead of this constant whining and I'm guilty and oh
Yeah.
mea culpa. Uh, it's un-German.
So the lesson that they learned, what they should have learned is don't commit genocide, but they've learned don't be against Zionists.
Well, that's true. That's true. And one can understand why the Zionists are still so angry at the Germans. but the genocide was worse in Russia, as I said,
Yeah.
and than in Germany, and we don't hear that.
Also, I mean, how they're supporting Ukraine and antagonized Russia, and what happened with the Nord Stream pipeline. I mean, they've kind of shot themselves in their own foot because for the foreseeable future, I can't see the economy turning around. How will their manufacturing base survive after what's going on? Even if the Ukraine war ends today, I can't see all of that oil, that cheap oil that they were getting from Russia, coming back anytime soon.
Well, they need it. That's what should be going to Western Europe is cheap Russian oil. Long-term use policy has been frightened by a possible entente between Russia and Western Europe, Germany in particular. And the Russians understand that friendship, they need friendship with Germany keep their industrial base going. But the Americans have done everything to block or thwart an entente between Germany and Russia, and they will continue. So, and that's why I think it was the Americans and the Israelis who blew up that Nord Stream pipeline. Very embarrassing. Russia should never have taken that line down.
Yeah, that is bizarre how that happened, and Germany hasn't even been able to ask what happened to even raise that as a question.
No, and the cell phone of the former German Chancellor Angela Merkel was tapped by the CIA, and the German government didn't even dare protest that. I mean, they've got to show some guts.
Yeah,
They haven't.
no. Okay, Eric, let's talk about what's happening in Lebanon. So the Israeli armies on the border of south of Lebanon trying to enter haven't been successful yet. How do you see that whole battlefront evolving, and where we are currently?
Well, as you mentioned, I was there with the Israeli army when they first invaded in 1982. One of the many invasions. And Israel has long had its eye on seizing the land of southern Lebanon up to the Litani River, which is the last important water source in the region that Israel does not control. And water, we have to overemphasize the importance of water in these conflicts. So it's sad. Lebanon is a powder keg. It's probably the Lebanon will spend more time fighting each other than they fight the Israelis. But they're definitely Lebanon is a target. Maybe they're going to shove all the Palestinians into southern Lebanon. I don't know yet.
Yeah, that's true. They're trying to clear southern Lebanon. I don't know how successful they'll be because Hezbollah is not the same force that it was in 2006 or any time before that. They have been preparing for this for a long time, and they've been performing very well so far. But even if Israel is able to clear southern Lebanon, Hezbollah can keep attacking Israel from northern Lebanon because they've got missiles that don't necessitate them to be in southern Lebanon to attack Israel.
Well, this is the dilemma faced by Israeli strategists in that they attack the enemy retreats, and then the enemy counterattacks them, and they get sucked deeper and deeper. We used in the U.S. Army, when I was a soldier, used to call it mission creep. And well, we've got to take one more hill. Oh, no, it's very strategic and all this, and the war gets bigger, and the more people Israel fights, the more it is at a disadvantage in the end because Israel doesn't want to take the casualties
Yeah.
or the expense of running a war.
Currently, they seem to be one of the strategies is to create a rift between Hezbollah and the Lebanese government. How successful do you think that will be?
Oh, the Lebanese can do it on their own. They don't need help from it. They're always fighting each other. Uh, but The rift question is interesting because Hezbollah and Hamas were both originally their creation was helped by Israel, by Israel's intelligence service Mossad, and they were financed by the Israelis in an Israeli attempt to split the PLO.
Wow, I knew that about Hamas. I didn't know that about Hezbollah.
Yes, they helped. They closed their eyes to fundraising and the armaments for the Hezbollah. Uh, I was in Nabatea, southern Lebanon, when the Israel it was on Ashura, a very holy day for Shia Muslims. When an Israeli armored column came roaring through Nabatea, shut the town up. Some of the local shites, they're firing back at the Israelis. That's how their fighting began. It was not out of some very clever strategy. It was just by accident. Stuff like this happens in all the wars.
Yeah,
So the Israelis are eventually the Israelis will start thinking, well, maybe they want to make allies with some of these people again. They're going to have to live with them at some point. Who are they going to align themselves to? Well, there
very
are
true.
always great numbers of traitors in the Arab world waiting for money and to make up with the Israelis. Look at Afghanistan.
Yeah,
Look at all the Afghans went over to the American side simply for money.
yeah. That reminds me, because I was listening to some of your past videos talking about Lebanon and the Christian community within Lebanon. Do you think there's a chance that Israel might be able to reach out to the Christian or part of some Christian community to see if they can bring them to southern Lebanon or to get them to take over things?
Yeah, excellent question. I'm sure the Israelis are thinking about it, or they're planning, or they're working on it already. The Lebanese Christians are natural allies of the Israelis, particularly the fanatical Lebanese Christian Maronites who are just one step away from fascist. They really enjoy the Israelis, and I'm sure they're working with them already.
Tell me this. So, the way things are at the moment, USA is not um, trying to not get dragged, sucked into the war in the Middle East, but at the same time, they have repeatedly said that they will not let Israel um, lose or fail. On the other hand, there's Iran, who has committed same kind of sentiments about Lebanon, saying we will not let Lebanon collapse, we will not leave Lebanon alone. And then behind Iran, there's Russia, and then there's China. So where does this go? Something has to give. How do you see things kind of in the next few months?
I think the Israelis are going to reemerge dominant in the whole region. They control the U.S. government totally now. They control the British government. The only people who are keeping their independence are the French, and they uh, they will assert Israeli dominance in southern Lebanon. They Netanyahu, I believe, is determined to throw out all the Palestinians or most of them from Gaza, maybe into Jordan, which is already about 40% Palestinian or maybe more so.
Yeah,
So if I were the Jordanians, I would be very nervous.
very true. Um, it's interesting. I don't see a path to victory for Israel, and for them to dominate their um, in their strength, or dominate themselves over the Middle East. The way things are at the moment, because they haven't been able to achieve a military victory in Palestine, in Gaza. They so far haven't been able to achieve much in Lebanon other than aerial bombing and destroying everything. And then they're picking a fight with Iran, which, because of the distance, I can't see them kind of succeeding there as well. So things are getting, the war is expanding, but I can't see things improving for Israel on the battlefield other than the few assassinations that they had, decapitating Hezbollah leaders. So um, it's interesting what you're saying, because I'm thinking if Israel is not able to assert themselves and to have a dominant position by the end of this will be disastrous for Israel, because the whole neighborhood at the moment, the whole region, is kind of subservient to Israel because they fear Israel, and that once that fear goes, how will they exist in that region? I don't understand.
I don't think they fear Israel that much. They fear its military capability. Israel could destroy every conventional Arab army that there is. Its nuclear tipped missiles could wipe out the entire Middle East if Israel wants it. So Israel has no real serious enemies on the ground. Uh, Despite all the destruction we see in Gaza, Israel is using the old policy of the Crusaders in the south of France during the Cathar Wars, saying, kill them all and God will sort out who's who. Uh, it's it's really happening in Gaza. Uh, and you know, Iran is held up. Oh, eventually, Iran is feeble militarily. Its airplanes can't fly because they don't have spare parts. Its military doesn't have any modern weapons. The only military effectiveness for Iran is if Israel decides to invade Iran and is foolish enough to get involved in a land war with Iranians who have a lot of experience in that, having fought the Iraqis for a decade. And there, the Iranians could put up a very stout resistance to the Israelis. But as long as the Israelis stay away from Iran, they have nothing to fear. These Iranian missiles don't work very well. Maybe the one they'll have nuclear weapons. I don't know. I hope not, but they may. And the Israelis and people are afraid of Israel's nuclear weapons because they know that if they provoke the Israelis enough, they'll unleash their nuclear weapons.
Interesting. About Iran's missiles, um, I thought the missiles have proven pretty accurate so far in the 1st October attacks that they had, where um, is you get mixed reports. Some like the Western media saying that most of them were intercepted, whereas Iran saying 90% landed. Even if the truth is somewhere in the middle, um, for a small country like Israel, that is must be quite scary. And now USA has sent their third battery. I don't understand how that can change the reality on the ground as well, given that it can only release 48 interceptor missiles when Iran might be firing thousands.
Well, Iran does not have thousands of missiles that go the very high trajectory into the stratosphere. That's what that THAAD system is for. A friend of mine used to work on it, so I know a bit about it. And they're probably okay, but Israel really has nothing to fear unless the Iranians get mad enough to fire a nuclear weapon or nose cones filled with nuclear material, which Israel was planning to do against Egypt in the 1950s. So there's nothing decisive or strategic that can be done at this point, particularly if the only Arab military power, which is Egypt, stays out of the picture and it's been bought out of the picture. The Israelis hold all the high cards.
Eric, thank you so much. There's so much more I wanted to ask you, including what's going on in Sudan, but maybe for a future episode. I don't want to hold you back too long. Before you go, please do tell us a bit about what some of the work you're involved in, because I read that you are working with like animal welfare. Um, you also have a vitamin company, is that right? Tell us
I
what you
did.
do.
I did. I'm not involved in that anymore.
Okay, so
I am very involved in trying to protect animals from cruelty and abuse.
excellent. Because when setting up this appointment for this session today, I was speaking with your assistant and I was asking for a picture of you, and she was saying, I can't find a picture of Eric without an animal. And I was thinking, that's really nice.
I love my little animals. I have quite a few in my house too. I think animals often behave better than humans. Sorry to say.
Yeah. How many animals have you got? Because I saw one of your videos where you said your wife has told you if you get one more, you're out.
my wife, my wife and I have divorced, so
Uh,
her threat came true, but it wasn't over animals. Fairly,
but you're free now to get
I
as
have a
many as you
couple.
want.
I have some cats, and I am planning to get some more.
Lovely. Eric, thank you so much for your time. This has been really fascinating. I've learned so much from you, and I'm sure the audience has as well. Um, I I would be grateful if you give us more time in the future. I will stay in touch. But thank you so much.
It's a joy for me to have such intelligent questions to answer. I appreciate your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. All the best. Thank you.